My name is Justin Corradetti. I'm a previous police officer, currently a mortgage broker. My secondary purpose, I would say at this point, is to be an advocate for modern masculinity and helping men that are struggling navigating the world, whether silently or outwardly. I struggled to pay attention in school and things like that, but I excelled in anything physical, basically. Doubled down in those areas, and I always gravitated towards leadership roles. Right out of high school, I started an apprenticeship and became an airplane mechanic. I incorporated myself. I built teams to travel with and went and sought out contracts for about 8 years. And it got to the point where I just got sick of living out of a suitcase, and it just fundamentally wasn't for me anymore. My brother had already become a cop. It's something that I always thought I would like to do. He was already on the job for a handful of years, so I got exposed to a lot of his policing friends and hearing the trials and tribulations of police work. So I set my mind to become a police officer, and that was going to be my transition away from aviation into my next step in life. And I didn't really want to take no as an answer. I applied with Edmonton Police Service, and at the time, it was a harder service to get onto for physical competition to get in. I was issued a cell phone to communicate, a covert phone to communicate with confidential informants, which subsequently led to agents. And agents are typically criminals, but people of the public that are hired by a police agency to do operations for them. It took me a long time to put context around why I was drawn to those things, but I realized quickly that I could create a safe place for people to be vulnerable. And that's something that is very difficult to do while wearing a uniform. Most coppers don't have the patience or the appetite to befriend criminals. And one thing that I could do that was rare in that capacity was I could see the humanity in people and provide them, I guess, the space to talk, to be vulnerable, and gain their trust quickly. And it's because I was doing it authentically and sincerely, and I actually sincerely cared. And their story, although very different from mine, it wasn't different at all. Their childhood sounded very similar. Their way they look at the world sounds very similar. But the one thing was that where I zigged in life, they zagged. They'd made one or two bad choices, and all of a sudden they're on a bad path that they don't know how to correct. And that was just a little bit of foreshadowing of like where I'm at today is like, that's where I draw from. That lack of initiation, specifically with men or young boys at that stage of life, is so crucial that essentially is statistically how it goes. Without those things in your life, without any sort of leadership or strong male figures in your life, for guys and girls, it leads to all the socioeconomic problems that police officers are faced with, whether the father is present in the home and just emotionally vacant, or physically not present. The recruiting process of gangs is family. They're specifically looking for people that have a lack of family or lack of leaders or mentors in their life, and they're inspiring them, showing them a world that they don't know, showing them a level of accountability and love that they don't feel at home. And that's the low-hanging fruit. That's how they get it in. You could be rich or poor, and that is where it starts. My home growing up was like A-type people, mom and dad. Very, very driven, both very performance-based doers, blue-collar, European and immigrant roots, hard-working people, but emotionally vacant. And I think I recognized without even realizing it that I would have been vulnerable in that environment if something changed in my life drastically at a young age where I needed emotional support on a high level. I'm grateful that it didn't. So I was able to find my way through it and help people along the way to give myself value, because I didn't necessarily have that voice growing up. Just intuitively, I've always been very emotionally aware and high level of emotional intelligence through that, which doing this for over 10 years in policing fostered that growth even more to be able to communicate with people on that level. I think As a result of all that experience of helping people on the job and feeling very good at it and dignified and dutiful in that environment, it became an identity without even realizing it. And I fell into this narrative of I was the fixer, I was the rescuer. I needed to help all people. I forgot that I needed that same level of care, love, respect. You got a problem, throw it in my backpack. I'll deal with it. I'll deal with it. I was good at it until I wasn't good at it anymore. And I ended up getting married. I decided that I didn't want to raise kids in the policing environment. Not that policing is toxic, but the type of cop that I wanted to be would have been toxic to the type of father that I wanted to be. So I made the choice to move back to my hometown of Kelowna, BC, and raise kids where I grew up. I had a fantastic childhood. I couldn't think of a better place to raise a family. So that's what I did. I pulled the pin early and moved back here, got married, quit my job, bought a house, and moved all in the same month. I became a mortgage broker of all things because I've always been invested in real estate as a side hustle. My dad built homes, but little did I know what was coming for me. I prided myself while I was a cop that it did not define me as a person. It wasn't my identity. I maintained all my core friendships prior to being a cop. And for those reasons, I figured that I was impervious to any sort of identity complex in leaving that role. The reality of it is it's impossible to do that job without it becoming your identity. And just because I wasn't arrogant about it and maintained humility didn't protect me from the fact that I was about to experience a huge identity shift. Like the whole PTSD narrative is very prominent. Fast forward, when I left the job, moving back to Kelowna, I went from feeling like Johnny Quarterback to Johnny Loser Sauce. I didn't realize how much my own identity was propped up by that role because I was always in a confident place growing up. As a sworn police officer, you refer to everyone else as civilians. You're used to people treating you a certain way, and then you get into a new community. Even though I grew up here and landed with somewhat of a network, everybody's doing different things. Everybody's at different stages of life. Kelowna was built on entrepreneurs because there isn't massive amounts of industry and opportunity here. So you kind of have to make your own narrative here. From a relationship standpoint, us moving to Kelowna was the answer, the solution. Moved to paradise. My ex had grown up vacationing here. I had grown up here. We just expected everything to be a slam dunk by virtue of moving here. Everything got a lot harder and a lot more in my face and a lot more present, and I had to start dealing with things, and I had no idea how. I didn't realize how leveraged I was through my previous community, how many resources I had that I no longer had. These are all things that came to fruition, and these are all the things that took a long time to come to be. This was my process, and these are the things I was going through. And because I had that personality prior to coming back here as the rescuer fixer, I attracted that type of relationship where my relationship was based on me fixing my person and basically becoming their dad or their big brother. As soon as that identity was gone in me, so was the relationship, because the whole dynamic shifted and we became completely different people upon landing here. Fast forward again, 2.5 years later, divorce is initiated. That is probably the start of my PTSD story. Divorce put a lot of trauma into my body. I couldn't conceive as something that would be viable in my life ever. In hindsight, up until that point, I never felt like I failed in anything. And that was the first time in my life that I felt like a failure. I felt literally like a loser, and there was nothing I could do to change it. Nobody was coming to save me. I was at a proverbial rock bottom in my life. When I moved here, I'd bought a house on a street that I thought was paradise. And quickly after moving in, I saw a house directly across the street that had a little bit more opportunity. It was more of a legacy style house. I decided that I was going to do everything within my power to obtain that house. I was able to achieve that goal quickly. A lot of my self-worth, a lot of my value, a lot of my purpose at the time was being able to achieve that. I thought it was going to appease the person in my life forever, and that quickly wore off as well because there was a lot of financial stress. Now we're taking on 2 mortgages and everything else. Financial stress, emotional stress, physical stress, mental stress, all these things piled on. And both people were dealing with these things at the same time. Divorce happens. 2 weeks later, I move out of the house into the house directly across the street. And within 2 weeks after that, there was a guy sleeping at that house every night, directly across the street from me. Roller coaster of emotions. Being at that place at that time was a defining moment of my comeback story of how did I allow myself to get to this place? Coming from the policing background and having that level of experience, there's a very small select group of people that can speak to that group of people I'll actually respectfully listen to. That was going to be a $500 an hour type of environment. And I couldn't afford it. So I felt really stuck, which led me living in like a mindset survival mode for a really long time. And the gift in that was that although my learning curve was slow, it forced me to lean into all the things that I've been ignoring my entire life. From that dark place, I had to find a way forward on my own without resources that I was used to having around me, without a community that I was used to having around me. I didn't want family around me. All the people that I showed up for in the past, one or two checked in with me out of what felt like thousands of people that I was there for. The one time that I'm going through a dark place in my life, nobody was around. And I took on a little bit of a victim narrative in that for a while, and I had to come out of that. Suicidal ideation was never a thing. It was something that I spoke to other people in the public about a lot, and it was nothing that ever crossed my mind. And that segment of my dark time was very short, and I quickly arrived at the place that I knew that wasn't an outcome, that would not be my reason. Like divorce and all the things leading up to it would not be my reason to end my own life. But it's something that I considered and something that I never thought I would ever consider. And just the fact that it was on my mind for a very short period of time scared the hell out of me. Dealing with all that stuff and seeing the infidelity right in front of my face and them telling me they don't love me and they're leaving and my whole life is changing. And the only reason I moved back to Kelowna when I did and left a career that I loved at the time was to raise a family. And now I wasn't doing that. And now that was the distant possibility. Everybody I was surrounding myself at the time, all good people, but none had the emotional intelligence that I needed. I was looking for me. I was waiting for somebody to show up for me in the way that I had done that for people in the past, and realizing there was a self-love piece missing in my life, that the reason that I was doing that so much in the past and was largely in part because of a missing internal narrative or a loving internal narrative of myself and lack of identity to myself, where I was attaching myself to these external validation, titles, roles, responsibilities, literally badges and trophies and things like that. Whereas by doing the work and understanding what makes up a true self-led identity, it isn't leveraged through ego, titles, roles, and responsibilities. It's leveraged through discipline and rituals and initiation into life in a really positive, formidable way that you can put context around and lean on when the times get tough. You can draw from these experiences, and when you start veering off path, you know what your recipe is to get back on path. And without that level of leadership growing up from an emotional standpoint, all you have is a performance mentorship and knowing how to be strong and make money. That does not help you when you're dealing with emotional grief. And that's basically where I had to go to rebuild on my own. And it took me 5 years of really leaning into that work before I could even focus on being a good mortgage broker. There were so many things that I had to put context around from my entire life, starting from childhood, looking at things that I was interested in. I was very creative and artistic, wasn't necessarily acknowledged on the level I guess I would have needed as a kid to pursue it. My physical presence or physical attributes were supported so much more that I didn't find anything creative, artistic valuable. So I started leaning into creative hobbies, painting and playing guitar, certain things that have really built my spirit up without expecting any sort of external validation, which I didn't learn how to do at a young age. And I find Not many have. And I was in an environment where I had nothing but time, nothing but space, zero distractions, loneliness. I never knew what that felt like before. I went from carrying 5 cell phones, getting called out in the middle of the night, always having something to do, be or go, to not having anywhere to go and phones never ringing. I felt like I didn't have the ability to lead myself, and realizing that it took me into that place of basically starting from scratch and building a brand new identity for myself. I had to re-identify with the world and myself. The more and more I started doing this, the more and more I started drawing in other like-minded people. I got to a place where I felt abundantly clear-minded again. All my routines and disciplines felt easy. I was grateful for being a mortgage broker now. And lo and behold, as soon as my attitude shifted, so did my business. Like, I became really busy, and year over year, I'm getting better. Well, how are you measured in that industry? By making more money. When there was gaps in my business, I was able to read books. I led men's groups, would bring groups of guys up on top of a mountain for a hike and do a round table style briefing and debriefing and talking about certain things with modern masculinity, and give everybody an opportunity to talk. 80% of suicides are men, and letting guys tell their stories in a way that they realize my story's not unique after they hear it from 10 other guys, and they realize, like, yeah, it's unique to me, but it's not unique. This is incredibly common. The large majority of men don't have the ability or environment or community or network to be vulnerable in a space like that, to be able to tell their story, to give them that feedback loop that what they're experiencing is normal. Their childhood, normal. At all scales of trauma, abuse, and all those things, very common. What's not common is that it's being properly addressed and discussed and brought together in community, and being able to feel the collective love and support from strong, disciplined men that you respect. So my goal in that environment is to be more of a conduit, just to try and share my story with them and share things that I've learned along the way, and explaining to them, like, there's no sense of arrival. This is a lifelong journey. We are trying to be 1% better every day as we go through this journey of life. We're all playing a game of snakes and ladders, and we're constantly trying to climb the ladders of life. And there's always this proverbial ambush that we can't see, and you land on a snake, and sometimes you drop down a level, sometimes you drop down all the way to the bottom. In hindsight, I'm incredibly grateful for that event now, because without that real life lived example, I would never be able to have the experience and wisdom to be able to put context around other men's situations now. The lack of mentorship, specifically with men at a young age, can lead to a life of crime. I've dealt with guys that come from extremely affluent families. It's not a money problem. It's an initiation problem. The parents bought him a Beamer for the first car, but never taught him how to throw a baseball or ride a bike. And, you know, if you don't have any of that in your home, it's really easy to get sucked into that environment. For me, that's where I provided value by just showing an ounce of humanity and respect. You're the person that they lean on, because they've never had that mentor in their life, or that person to show them a little bit of humility and compassion. To me, I keep going back to that because it was like the metaphor for the rest of my life of recognizing whether you're a criminal or a decorated business person, we're all human beings that want the same type of support and love. And if you're in a place in your life where you weren't able to build up a high level of self-love that's not fostered through ego and bank account and any sort of external validation, that's really built on like your own ethos and disciplines and rituals and things that intrinsically make you, that's a really rare thing. That is what I aspire to be moving forward, and literally becoming 1% better every day in that direction for the rest of my life. And what's unfortunately extremely common is there's a lot of men walking around with the internal coding that they're intrinsically broken. Some are conscious of this and some are subconscious of this, and it plays out in their life in other ways and manifests in other ways through addictions and failed relationships, whether it's personal, romantic, or business. The one commonality which starts from childhood is there's some sort of fracturing in their life that occurs that lasts with them for the rest of their life, for them to have the self-belief that they're unworthy of love, respect, any of the things that they're dying to get. It's a story and narrative they've told themselves for a very long time that they're unworthy of. When men don't take care of their mental health, it can be subjective. Statistically, a lot of men kill themselves as a result of not taking care of their mental health. And it's not a matter of them not wanting to, it's them not knowing how to, because they feel stuck. They feel like a burden. They don't feel needed or useful anymore to anything. So the only solution is to end their existence. The alternative is there's also a large demographic of men that I would articulate choose slow motion suicide. So they live a lifestyle of addiction and abuse because they're not about to kill themselves, but they're also not about to take any healthy steps to improve the quality of their life, their thoughts, or their physical body. One thing I noticed in working with informants, a lot of these men were very high level drug dealers, which it equals aptitude for violence. And one thing that I felt really proud of, or something that I noticed, is that when I was involved in their life and they had somebody to reach out to, even though it was a cop, they weren't engaged in violence. One of my sources, his best friend was killed in a drive-by shooting, and I was there to be his therapist, essentially, and talked him through it and spent hours with him on the phone, having coffee and talking about things, having somebody there to properly handle that situation and be supporting, to recognize what they are processing, led to him distancing himself further and further from that lifestyle. That's not conducive to becoming successful if you want to be a career criminal. A police officer helping in that role, it doesn't help me on paper to spend that much time with him, but I've always taken the relational approach with people. And that's something that in all capacities of my life has spoke volumes to build my internal sense of worth and identity up. And I've witnessed when you can lead others in that way to lead their own internal community. That's what pushes me to keep going in this environment, is just to keep evolving and keep learning and keep growing and keep recognizing when people need someone to recognize what they're going through. But above all else, never pouring from an empty cup again. Never trying to do that from a space that you don't have all the tools on your belt ready to go for that situation. It's not selfish. It's not arrogant. It's not narcissistic to have your own back first. In high pressure roles like first responder work, military operatives, anything like that, where you're high frequency, high adrenaline, high dopamine in your day to day, for most people I've noticed it's a duty, it's a calling. You feel so good in that environment that you don't even realize the stress load that you're taking on. And you get so proficient in operating in those environments that you want more of it. Adrenaline is addicting. Dopamine is very addicting. We already know that. That's something that impacted me huge. Stepping out of that role, I didn't realize how many internal chemicals I was producing on a day-to-day basis. One of the things that I started doing was cold plunging to manufacture a lot of internal dopamine, epinephrine, and there's a whole other host of physiological responses, but it added like a missing puzzle piece in my recovery journey for me. It wouldn't be for everybody. If you're a first responder or anything and involved in an environment where you're getting a lot of high frequency, high dopamine situations, adrenaline fueled, and you're not getting that anymore at this period of your life, you need to find something that is going to replicate that in a healthy way, and something that you can build some routine and discipline around, because this is now something that you can control, opposed to being forced into a situation out of your control, and then your nervous system takes over and is steering the ship, opposed to you steering the ship and doing things that you know are going to promote well-being within you.